Hello and welcome to the second video of this series, Master the Elastic Stack course, all you need to get started with the Elastic Stack. In this video I'm going to show you how to install and set up Elasticsearch and Kibana. We are covering the second topic in the course outline, setting up an Elasticsearch cluster and a Kibana instance. And just reviewing the learning objectives of the course, our first objective is to be able to install and configure a secure Elasticsearch cluster. Before I start the demo, here's what I will be setting up in my lab environment. I have 3 virtual machines that I will be installing Elasticsearch on, one virtual machine for Kibana, and another virtual machine for an ingestion server to set up later. After setting up the first node, you will have a cluster by default called Elasticsearch. You can use it by itself, but it's recommended to have at least 3 nodes to have data resiliency. In this lab environment, we'll try to emulate a production environment as much as possible. So we'll set up another 2 nodes and join them to the cluster so we can have a cluster of 3 nodes. And then we'll set up Kibana and log in to see our cluster on the GUI interface. So what we're going to be doing in the demo is installing Elasticsearch on an Oracle Linux server, a distro based on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And then I'm going to be configuring the YAML file, which contains the main settings of Elasticsearch. Then we're going to add nodes to the cluster. And then finally, we'll install and configure Kibana and log in to start managing our cluster. And now we'll jump to the CLI of the first node and start the demo. I am on the first node. I'm running Oracle Linux 8, a Red Hat Enterprise Linux distribution. And I'm going to install Elasticsearch with RPM just to make upgrades and package managing easier. On the official documentation, there are instructions on how to install Elasticsearch on other operating systems such as Windows and macOS. To start installing Elasticsearch, we first have to download and install the public signing key to make sure we have a secure package by running this command, and I will link the documentation URL in the description. Then we create a repository file for Elasticsearch in this directory, and we'll call it elasticsearch.repo, and we'll add this content to the file. We are going to be installing package or release 8, or the latest release in version 8. I'll save this file, and to start installing Elasticsearch, we'll run the command dnf install, and we'll enable the repository, and we'll install Elasticsearch. This will take a few minutes, and after it's done, we will be ready to configure Elasticsearch. This is a summary of what it is going to be installing. Elasticsearch version 8.14.3. This is the latest release, and we'll just press Y, and we will start downloading the packages and installing. After the installation is completed, we get this information printed on the console saying that the security features are enabled by default. Basically, we have TLS certificates created for the transport layer and the HTTP layers. In the Elastic Stack context, transport layer is for encrypting internode communications, and the HTTP layer is for clients to communicate securely with Elasticsearch. We also have the password of the Elastic built-in super user. We have it generated here. This is what we're going to use when logging into Kibana for the first time. And we also have the commands explaining how to generate a token for a new node and for Kibana, and the password or the command for resetting the password for the Elastic user. And we have to run the following commands because Elasticsearch doesn't start automatically, we'll enable the service and start it. And I'll type system control start Elasticsearch service. And now the service is started. We can double check by running the command system control status Elasticsearch service, and we can see it active and running. And after the service starts, we can test that our Elasticsearch node is up and running by sending an HTTPS request to the node itself or the local host on port 9200 by running the command curl and specifying the CA cert automatically created in this directory, and specifying the user Elastic with the newly created password and HTTPS localhost port 9200. And we'll get the following output with the node name. The cluster name is Elasticsearch by default, and we can see the version number. Now I'm going to be doing the following 3 changes on the host. I'm going to change the Elastic user password, and this is optional. I'm going to configure Elasticsearch using the YAML file, and I'm going to allow communications to the ports needed by Elasticsearch on the local firewall. To change the password for the Elastic user that is automatically generated, we'll navigate to the directory user share Elasticsearch bin, and this is where all the binary files are. We have all these tools available to do some configuration tasks. We can start Elasticsearch, we can generate certificates, we can reset passwords, and this is what we're going to use, and many other tools. To change the password, I'm going to run this command, reset password, and I'm just going to access the help menu. And we need to specify the user with -u, and I'm going to make it interactive by using this option to get it to prompt us to enter our password, not randomly generate one. It's going to say -i or -i and specify the user Elastic. I'm going to say yes, I'm going to continue, and I'm going to specify a simple password for this demo. Now the password is successfully changed. Now I'm going to change the configuration file for Elasticsearch. I'm going to the directory etc Elasticsearch, and here we have the Elasticsearch YAML file that contains the main configurations of Elasticsearch. And the main thing here is we're going to specify a cluster name. I will name my cluster Elastic Series. The second thing is the node name. Call this node 1 ES01. Third important setting is the IP address for the network host, and we have the HTTP port that it listens on. It's 9200 by default, but I'm just going to explicitly specify that. And I'm going to save the file. And after we change the configurations in Elasticsearch YAML, we need to restart the service. And the third thing I need to do is opening 2 ports on the firewall of this machine. First, the port that Elasticsearch listens on, and the port that will allow the nodes to communicate when forming a cluster. I'm going to run the following commands and add a port 9200 TCP, and the port for internode communication is 9300 TCP. And after I made the changes and restarted the service, I can run the HTTPS request to the local host, and I didn't specify the password here. It will prompt me to enter the new password, and I can see the changes reflected by this new cluster name and this output. Now I have a fresh installation of Elasticsearch on node 2. This is my Elasticsearch 02, and all I had to do was run or import the GPG key and create a repository and then install Elasticsearch. And over here I have a fresh installation of Elasticsearch on node 2 with the same version. And also on node 3 I installed Elasticsearch, and it is finished. Now if I run these commands to start, enable and start the Elasticsearch service on node 2 and 3, they will form their own individual clusters. But we don't want that. We need to join them to our existing cluster on node 1. So back on node 1 here, the first thing we need to do after node 1 is up and running, we need to explicitly define the master eligible nodes in the cluster. This is known as cluster bootstrapping. This is only required when the cluster starts up the first time, and we want to avoid forming a separate cluster on each individual node when they come up. We'll open the Elasticsearch YAML file again here on node 1. And we will define the following settings. First of all, the cluster name. It has to be the same on all nodes. We have to have a unique node name. We have to have a unique network host. Each host will have its own IP address. Now down here at the bottom of the YAML file, under the security settings, we have this cluster initial master nodes setting enabled, and it has only node 1, which is the node itself, and we're going to add the other nodes, but I'm going to use the IP addresses of each of the nodes. Now this way all of my nodes are master eligible. Now the other setting I need to enable is in this section, discovery, and it is the discovery seed hosts. I will enable this setting, and I will also add all of the nodes. This setting specifies the initial list of nodes that the Elastic cluster will use to discover and communicate with each other. Now I'm going to list the contents of the certs directory, the ones that are created by default. Node 1 right now is currently the root certificate authority, and in a later lesson we'll create a new CA and set up new certificates for each node and for Kibana. Now we're going to copy these certificates from node 1 to the other nodes to ensure that we have the same secure settings for secure communication and proper functioning. I'm going to use SCP and all the contents of this directory, and I'm just going to copy them to the other nodes. And to node 3. And these will just overwrite the ones that exist on nodes 2 and 3. After we copy the certificates on each node, and before we move to nodes 2 and 3 and make sure the settings are set on the YAML files, we're also going to set up the key stores on nodes 2 and 3. The key store is a secure storage mechanism used to store sensitive information such as passwords, API keys, and SSL certificates. And you can just reference whatever password you need inside, for example, the YAML file, instead of typing in the password in clear text. But first, on node 1, I'm going to navigate to the binary directory. We'll go to user, share, Elasticsearch, binary. And if I list what I have in the binary directory, we have this tool, Elasticsearch-key store. I'm going to run and show the help menu for this utility. We can create a key store, we can list the entries, we can remove, we can change the password of the key store. And I'm just going to list what entries we have. We have these 3 passwords on node 1 for the HTTP and transport layer. I'm going to show the value of these passwords on node 1, and then I'm going to create them on nodes 2 and 3 just to match and be able to make the nodes be able to communicate with each other when forming the cluster. I'm going to run the command show, and this is the first entry, and I'm going to do that for the other 2 and then create them on nodes 2 and 3. Now on node 2, after I removed the values in the key store, the existing values, and then added the new ones that match node 1 to be able to communicate with node 1 and join it in the same cluster, I'm going to be doing 2 things: setting up the Elasticsearch YAML file on node 2, and then opening the ports on the local firewall so that the communication happens between the 2 nodes. So I'll go to etc Elasticsearch and open the Elasticsearch YAML file. And here I have to make sure the cluster name is the same. And I'll get the name from node 1. I'll give node 2 its unique name. I'll put the IP address for node 2. I'll specify it's port 9200 even though it's the default. The discovery seed hosts, I'll put the same setting, make sure they all discover each other. And the cluster initial master nodes, I can use this setting, but it is already enabled from before. And I'll just use the same setting from node 1. They are all master eligible. And I don't need to change those because I copied the certificates from node 1 to the same directory, same location on node 2. So these are all set. I'll save the file, and now I'll open the ports on Elasticsearch node 2 on the local firewall, 9200 and 9300. And now after I copy the certificates, I made sure the key store values are the same as node 1. I configured Elasticsearch YAML file and I opened the ports. I'm going to enable the Elasticsearch service on node 2 and start it. Starting the service takes a few seconds, and we can double check with system control status Elasticsearch, and we can see it active and running. And after it starts, I'm going to run this HTTPS request. I'm going to skip SSL verification. I'm going to authenticate with the Elastic user, and this is the URL and endpoint for the cluster health. I'll type the password for Elastic, and I can see the cluster name is the same as we specified, and we have the number of nodes is 2. That means we joined successfully to the first node, and we have a cluster of 2 nodes. And on node 3, the same thing. I removed from the key store the current values. I added the new ones that will match node 1. I edited the YAML file with the same cluster name, the same discovery seed hosts, and the same cluster initial master nodes settings and its unique node name and node IP. And then I added the ports 9200 and 9300 to the local firewall. I allowed communication to those ports. And now I'm going to enable the service and start it. And now after the Elasticsearch service starts, I'm going to send the HTTPS request to this cluster health endpoint, and we will see the cluster name is matching with the cluster that we joined it to, and the number of nodes is now 3 nodes. Now we move on to install and set up our Kibana instance. I am running Kibana on a different server. It's a similar process. First, we'll download and install the public signing key with this command, and then we'll install from a repository. We'll create this file. And then we'll run the command dnf install Kibana. It will download the latest version, which is fine as long as it's the same version as Elasticsearch. We are running Elasticsearch 8.14.3, so I'll just say yes. Now after Kibana installs, we can start the Kibana service and browse to the web page of Kibana, and we can enter an enrollment token that we can generate from Elasticsearch. I'm just going to show you the location of the utility that allows us to create this enrollment token. On an Elasticsearch node, we can go to user share Elasticsearch binary directory, and with this tool here, Elasticsearch create enrollment token, we can create a token for a new node or for Kibana. With the -s or the scope, we can create a token for either a node or Kibana, and this is the easiest option, but we're going to use the configuration file to set up Kibana and configure it in case we have any extra options or any advanced settings that we need to use. But since we are on the Elasticsearch node, we need to copy the CA cert from Elasticsearch to Kibana, and this is the HTTP CA cert, and we will copy it to the Kibana node. After Kibana is installed, I'm going to navigate to the configuration directory of Kibana, and this is the CA cert that we copied from the Elasticsearch node, and we are going to the Kibana YAML file and start configuring Kibana. The first thing is the server port. We need to specify it. It's by default 5601. You can have a custom port. The server host, I'm going to specify the IP address of Kibana. Elasticsearch hosts. This is a list of Elasticsearch hosts that Kibana sends queries to when we are querying the data in Elasticsearch. So I'm going to just specify our 3 nodes with HTTPS and the port that Elasticsearch listens on. And this is for basic authentication. I'm going to specify the username and password that Kibana uses to authenticate with Elasticsearch. And I need to go to Elasticsearch and use the reset password for this user and just specify this simple password so that Kibana can authenticate with Elasticsearch. And the last setting we need to specify is the SSL certificate authorities. So I'm going to specify the CA cert that we copied over from the Elasticsearch node. I copied it to the configuration directory of Kibana. I'm going to save this file, and now I'm going to enable the Kibana service and start it. But before I start the service, I'm going to node 1 and reset that password before I forget. -I for interactive to get prompted, and the user is Kibana system. I'll re-enter the password. I'm going back to the Kibana server. I'm going to start the Kibana service. And we can double check the status of the Kibana service. And we can see it is active and running, and we don't see any errors here. And one last thing before we forget, we need to allow communication to the Kibana port, the port that Kibana listens on, 5601. So on a web browser, we will browse to the IP address of Kibana with port 5601. And we will get the login screen. Welcome to Elastic. We'll log in with the Elastic super user and the password that we specified when we were setting up our cluster. So this is the welcome screen on Kibana. Right here it tells you if you want to start by adding integrations, so you can add data sources and then start ingesting data to your cluster to start analyzing it, or use our solutions to add search anywhere, observe the ecosystem or your ecosystem, and then defend against security threats. So you can see from here the areas they focus on: analyzing data, search solutions, and observability and security. I'm going to click on explore on my own, and you can see the 4 main areas they focus on. In a later video, we'll do an overview of Kibana and how to use it and the different features and different apps inside of Kibana. I'm just going to access stack monitoring, and in a later video I'm going to be setting up monitoring with metric beat. But for now I'm just going to click on this option here, setup with self monitoring, and I'll just turn it on with this button. And this is our cluster overview. We have a healthy cluster. You can see the version, the uptime, the license, we're using the basic license. We have the number of nodes here and the indices created so far. I'm just going to click on nodes and we can see our 3 nodes, and the one with a star beside it is the master node. We can see the CPU usage, the load average, and lots of other information. And if we click on one of the nodes, we can access and look at more information on that specific node. But for now, we have a cluster. We called it ELK series with 3 nodes. It's healthy and we can access it with our Kibana instance. In this video, we went through the steps to install and configure Elasticsearch, form a cluster, and set up Kibana. Up next, setting up security for the cluster. Stay tuned and I will see you in the next one.